Um,
All right. So this week's Torah portion is Parshat Noach, continuing the discussion
Hello. Coming to
that we've
class.
had over the course of the end of the book of the end of the Parshat Bereshit. Really kind of just picked up right from there. God created the world, and he looked back at Tov Ma'od. Everything was beautiful, was all great for all about a few minutes, right? Then he kind of handed the keys of the kingdom to human beings, and it got a little bit more bumpy from there, right? Adam and Noach's, Adam and Eve's mistake with the tree of knowledge. Then you have following Adam and Eve's mistake. You have Cain and Abel's incident. Then kind of from there it goes, and it's there's not one generation where it's all hunky dory up until the point 10 generations into this experiment. God says, "I've had enough," right? And that's the end of Parshat Bereshit, and where Parshat Noach picks up, right? There's an old adage, and we will, we'll talk a little bit more about it next week. But it says that Parshat Bereshit begins happy, creation of the world, Garden of Eden, ends off on a pretty sad note, right? God is remorseful over the world that He has created, right? Ki nichamti ki asitim, that God says, I have regretted that I have made them. And that's the way Parshat Bereshit is. Begins happy, ends sad. Parshat Noach begins sad, right? Destruction of all of humankind and all other species. But it ends happy because we get introduced to Avraham, or Avram, at the end of Parshat Noach. Finally, Parshat Lech Lecha is a parsha with happy all the way through because we spent the entire parsha, the entire week, living with Avraham and Sarah. But we're not there just yet, right? So we're kind of right in the midst of this roller coaster, with starting off with Bereshit, ending with the very sad circumstance that leads into this parsha where God is going to pull the trigger, right? He waited, 10 generations, and it didn't happen. There wasn't a redeeming aspect. And God then has to pull the trigger and hit the reset button, right?
and then he hears Abraham say to him, "But what if there's even one righteous person?"
That comes later, right? Well, you bring it up, so let's go there. Let's kind of go straight to that point. Very famous, and something we've discussed, but we're going to take it a little bit in a different direction than we have until now. Very famous quote at the beginning of this parsha, in which God introduces Noah. Right? God introduces Noah. He's the hero, the theme of the parsha. He gets a whole parsha named after him. Right? Something, by the way, that Moshe or Abraham don't even get. But Noah gets a Torah portion. The second Torah portion of all the Torah is named after him. And it tells us and introduces us, and it almost seems to have more accolades for Noach than we don't get this whole little personal bio blurb about Avraham. It never says, and Avraham was this or that, and whatever it is. It just immediately goes into his life events. But with Noach, we said Noach, Eile Toldot Noach, right? These are the happenings of Noach, and then the Torah gives us a little bit of a blurb, right? Noach is tzaddik tamim haya b'dorotav. Noach was a righteous person, perfect tamim, right? Perfect in his generation. Et ha'elokim hitalech Noach, because Noach walked with God. And then it goes on to tell us the story. So we get this nice little blurb, right? Right? It's like, when you have a guest speaker or a guest commentator, whatever it is, they send you in advance their little bio. This is what I want you to say about me as you introduce me, right? A graduate from here, a professor here, a contributor here, an author this. Here's a little blurb, Noach gets a little blurb there, right? And it's pretty impressive. The credentials are pretty nice, right?
Well,
God defines him as, one second, right? Paul is already jumping but the caveat, as it were,
yeah,
right?
to say the least.
Right. So it says, as I said, this is kind of well known. It says it was a righteous person, perfect, and God could have very well stopped there, right?
But
And
he
Noah
didn't.
Would have been
He didn't stop there.
more than happy had God stopped right there, right? Noach was Is Sadiq Tamim. That's right. Just say that, right? Noach is an Is Sadiq, a righteous person and perfect. No, but then God throws in that little caveat, that little qualifier. He was Is Sadiq, righteous person, Tamim Haya, perfect, Bidorotav, in his generation. Okay, what does that mean? Right? Perfect.
I have a joke about that. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
Right, exactly. Okay, good.
I have another one. The Who. Some of us are old enough to remember the Who.
Okay, the
Who?
band.
The Who, the band. Talking about my generation. My generation.
Right. So here's the thing. The Torah goes out of its way to add that qualifier. Now, two people, Rav and Shmuel, are debating this. And one says that the purpose of the qualifier is to speak to Noach's great stature. Not only was he was perfect despite the miserable generation that he was in. So, I mean, this is a really special individual, right? So the Torah is going out of its way to share its accolades. Hey, Stuart. shalomchabad.com/Zoom. I will text it to you.
My generation.
That's a musical interlude. Thank you, Les.
I'll bet that one of you, besides me, stormed the fences at Meriwether Post so we could see the concert for free.
What year was that?
Shalom Chabad.
1979, I think.
Really?
Okay, we're back.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
We're back.
Okay, I'm muting.
Okay.
I'm muting.
All right. So that's one opinion. Fascinatingly enough, and I don't know what this means about us Jewish people and our dispositions towards positive or negative, but that's the opinion that nobody really focuses on. The fact that when God says Bidorotav, that's to add to Noach's prestige. They're saying not only was he righteous and perfect, he was righteous and perfect despite his horrible generation, and so the Torah is going out of its way.
It doesn't say despite his generation.
A peg. What
I mean,
most
but he
people
wasn't always so perfect, though. Like, if you look at his behavior after, like, he wasn't.
Well, right, but
I wouldn't go.
But he
so
wasn't
hard
that great,
to say
right?
right. We can't jump ahead. We got to work our way through this. The other opinion, and the better known opinion, is that God is qualifying. That God is kind of adding this qualifier to kind of temper the enthusiasm of his description, saying that Noah was righteous and perfect, but only in his generation, compared to his generation. And that the sage clarifies what he means. Had he been in the generation of Abraham, he would not have been considered anything special.
I didn't know philosophically the word perfect had qualifiers. Was allowed
Good.
I don't think that's not the word. It's tamim, isn't it?
Yeah, tamim, but tamim in this case means perfect. That's where tamim.
Really?
Yes. It means without flaw.
Oh,
So here's the thing. There's a couple questions to ask on that second interpretation. Number one, this is the parsha that teaches us proper etiquette, in that we have to go out of our way to say things in the most positive way. Not only do we have to be honest, but we actually have to go an extra step, go the extra mile to paint the most positive view or perspective of something that we can. Definitely not the opposite. Definitely not going the other direction. In other words, to go out of our way to find something negative to say. So it is particularly surprising that over here, and I say, how does this week's parsha teach us that point? Because when the Torah was telling us what animals Noah had to take onto the ark, it said, go take the animals, hatorot, the kosher animals. And it doesn't then go say, and then you shall take the animals hatameot, right? The animals that are treif, or not, the animals that are tameh, or impure. Rather, it says habehemot, the hatarot, the pure animals, and that's the Hebrew way of referring to the kosher animals. The habehemot asher einenu tahora, and the animals that are not tahor. So going out of its way to say it in the most positive way, rather than saying, like, right? We as kids, we always learned the proper etiquette is to say good or not good, right? Not to say not bad, not to say bad, right? And this lesson is taught in this parsha. So this parsha that teaches us that one has to go out of the way to paint something in the most positive light is the same parsha that goes out of its way. God goes out of his way to cut Noach down a peg. I mean, really? You couldn't just leave it well enough alone and say he was a tzaddik and he was a tamim. You had to say, don't think he was such a great tzaddik. He was a tzaddik, but only compared to his generation. He would have been in a generation. You got to be that kind of schnook to take it away from Noach. You couldn't give him that. You couldn't just let him have it. You had to cut him down. Number one.
maybe the message is that, God describes these horrible, horrible people, and how terrible they were. So if Noach managed to be good, then all
just
around
say he
him
was good. We don't have to sit there and say. Now, again, the one who says that the Torah is going out of its way to say, even despite his generation, no, so we're adding to his prestige. Makes sense. I get it. But to the one that says, no, we're actually cutting down the prestige. You couldn't just leave it alone. You couldn't just say Noach was. You had to sit there and stick in that little barb, the air quotes, right? That Noach was perfect, like the little shrug.
Well, maybe the Torah is setting us up to not be too deflated later on when he's rolling around in a drunken stupor, and which doesn't say much for him. But that's the first thing he does after he hits dry land. So maybe the Torah is laying the groundwork to say he's not absolutely perfect.
Well, actually, you are
Wrong.
On the right track. On the right track.
Very much on the right track. But the Torah is heading us off about his behavior even before that. So hold that thought. We're going to get to it in a second, but I still have to make the other point, which is the point that Paula made. And since when is perfect a sliding scale? Since when can you qualify perfect? Last time I checked, it either is or it isn't. It's not a relative measure, right? There's this great little anecdote in the Reader's Digest, right? They have, these little funny, cute stories, people in life, whatever it is. So one of the stories this guy's writing, he says he is a contractor, builder, and he brought on this high schooler to be like, just to help him, to be a for a summer job, the kid would just help. As they call it in Yiddish, a schickingel, right? The kid you can the gopher, go for this, go for that, right? So give a kid a couple bucks, the guy would help him. So he writes says whatever this kid was lacking in expertise, he made up for in enthusiasm. He says, and he illustrates with a story. He says, we were holding a piece of wood and we needed to hold it level, kind of a cross beam, and it needed to be just right. And so I told the kid, you hold it and then you'll keep an eye on the level, right? That, the little green tube with the bubble, and it has to be just between the lines. And that's when you know that you're not tilting the wood either up or down. So this kid had to monitor how and the guy says, I am kind of inching the piece of wood up, and I hear the kid say, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, and then I hear him say, oh, perfect, perfect. It can't get any more perfect than that. So I said, I bent down to get the drill, the screw to screw it into place, the piece of wood into place, and I move the wood by a couple centimeters, and I hear him go, even better.
Yeah.
Right. So I was like, was he perfect or was he not perfect? What do you mean perfect in his generation? But in a different generation, and that's called not perfect.
Right.
Maybe like, the concept of like we're born exactly as we should be, that we're perfect, like as God made us.
But then wouldn't everybody? So why does he then just get?
We're as we should be, though. None of us are perfect.
Something very good. Very
Yeah, I think the obvious and maybe the most pungent lesson you walk away with is that perfection is relative. It's not absolute. There's not absolute perfection. It's relative.
Relative, and so good. So obviously,
so it introduces relativity into the relationship with God. So if you are perfect by some standard, that means you have really tried your all under those circumstances. That's the best you can do. And even though it may be someone else maybe do better, the point is that you've given your all for God, and that's the lesson to be learned from those experiences.
So you're saying, all right, you're kind of building on what Carrie was saying. And I think here's something very important. This is, you want to talk about, obviously the Rebbe has any number of hundreds, if not thousands of lessons of groundbreaking and earth-shattering and fundamental teachings and lessons and guidances and advice, right? Any number of books have been written, not only the Rebbe's own writings described, but books written adapting the Rebbe's teachings, etc., etc. But the lesson that the Rebbe learns here is one of the most classic, and you're going to hear it. It is so classic Rebbe in the fact that it is brilliant. It kind of perfectly, not only in his generation, but in all generations, perfectly gives an answer. And on top of that, the message is so important and so inspirational and so meaningful. This is, and again, call this one classic Rebbe. Here's what the Rebbe says. The Talmudic opinion, the commentary, who said that we're throwing in a caveat that he was perfect in his generation, doesn't leave it at there, but draws a contrast to who, and said that if he would have been in the generation of
Avraham, yeah.
Right, drawing the contrast between Noach and Avraham specifically. Was that just an arbitrary name? He said, if he would have been, for example, in the generation of, could he have supplanted that with Yitzchak or Moshe, or is he saying Abraham specifically? Is there something in that that further clarifies his point? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And in fact, without that added explanation, we are not going to truly understand the point of what he's saying. And therefore, not what he's saying, the point of what he's saying, God is saying. Right? God is telling us righteous, perfect in his generation, and know this because, as Les said, there's something we need to learn from that. God is not in the business of simply cutting Noach down to size. God is clarifying something because we need to know this. It's important that we know this. It's important that we know in his generation. There's a very important life lesson to be learned in that qualifying. And what is it? And what it is in drawing the contrast between Noach and Avraham. Noach and Avraham both faced a similar situation, and they responded radically different. God came to Noach and said, I am going to destroy the world. I'm going to wipe out all humanity. Build an ark and escape. Right? And preserve you and your family, and we'll rebuild from there. What does Noach respond to God?
Okay.
Forget about it. Forget
I
about it.
What? I missed what you said last. What?
You got to be kidding.
Right. There's the old Cosby routine, right?
Right.
Who is this really? Right? But the answer is, he says, yes, sir. And he builds the ark, puts in everything, and floats away. God turns to Avraham and says, Avraham, I'm going to wipe out the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. And how does Avraham respond?
No.
How dare
Negotiation.
you, God? He begins to debate God. Comes the Torah, and the Torah says that contrast. Take note of. Noach is what we refer to as a tzaddik in pelts, a tzaddik in a fur. The whole rest of the world is freezing cold, but you're warm. You're righteous. You're taken care of. You're good. And that's what your concern is. Avram was not a tzaddik in pelts. It was not good enough for Avram that he was taken care of. What about everybody else? Which led Avraham to go evangelize the truth, right? And have a four-doored tent that opened in all directions, and to make it his life's mission to not only know the truth, but to teach the truth. You know who was living in the days of Avraham when the rest of the world had sunk into paganism? And Avram says, this can't be, we need to do something about it. We need to try to influence people back to the truth. You know who's still alive in the days of Avraham? Noach,
Yeah.
who was, by the way, the patriarch of every human being alive. If you have to think about it, who was probably the most influential individual, was probably the progenitor of everybody on the planet. Right? But Avraham is the one who took up the cause of saying, it's not good enough that I know the truth. It's not good enough that I am righteous and I am taken care of. I have to care about everybody, even the sinners of Sodom and Gomorrah. God, Avram tries to say, God, not yet. Maybe there's some hope. Maybe there are 50. Maybe there's 45. Maybe there are 40. Maybe there are 30 righteous people. How dare you give up hope on them? I'm not ready to give up hope, says Avram. Until the point where God runs through with him the numbers, and then he sees there's really no alternative. But up until that point, Avram feels an incredible sense of responsibility for those outside of himself, even terrible, horrible sinners. And Noach didn't. And the Torah says, while we are going to say that Noach was a righteous person and perfect, we want to qualify that because we don't want you to think, God says, I don't want you to walk away thinking, I should emulate Noach. If the Torah calls him righteous and perfect, then I should emulate. I should look at everything that Noach did and I should emulate it. No. Bidorotav. Had he been next to Avraham, he would have been insignificant. Learn from Avraham, not from Noach.
Question,
Yes.
question. Where does the idea or the texts explain that Noah walked with God?
It's there. Those are the words. The very next
Right,
words, right?
so how does that fit with everything you just said?
Ah, even before those words, I have another question. Fine. So then you can't call Noach perfect. He was far from perfect. He might have been a righteous individual. That I'll give him. I'll give him that first accolade. Tzaddik. But to say he was perfect, his generation, not his generation, he was not perfect. How are you calling him perfect, Torah, after we just finished indicting his character? Right? It's a pretty serious indictment. How do you then call that perfect, God? Even if comparative to his generation, that's not perfect. That's righteous. I'll give him that. He was a righteous man. But perfection seems like a bridge too far. And that is, again, this is the brilliance of the Rebbe. Listen how exact. Perfect, it doesn't say perfect compared to the people of his generation. What does it say?
Bidorotav.
Perfect in his generation. And when later the commentary clarifies, it says, it doesn't say, had he been standing next to Avraham, person-to-person comparison. It says, Ilu haya bidoro shel Avraham. Had he been in the generation of Avraham, he would have then been considered like nothing, insignificant.
He would have been what, Rabbi?
Had he been in the generation of Avraham. It doesn't say had he been standing next to him. It's not a person-to-person comparison. What we are actually comparing and contrasting is not really Noach and Avraham. What are we really comparing and contrasting? Their generations. Noach was perfect. And his generation, had he been in Avraham's generation, doesn't say had he been next to Avraham. Why? Says the Rebbe something very powerful and important to understand here. What Noach did was perfection. Turning his back on the generation and walking into the ark was perfection. That's what the Torah tells us. Tamim was perfection. But it was perfection under the circumstances. In his generation, that was right. In his generation, that was perfect modus operandi. Why? Because what do we know about Noach's generation? They were a generation like we will never see again. Corrupt to the core, beyond any hope of repair. That's why God hit the reset button. There was no hope. It's so hard for us to fathom such a generation. And the reason is because there has never been any generation hence. How do I know this? Because God said so. Never will there be a generation like this again.
So this notion of Sur Merah, which is what Noach did when he walked into the ark, is what the Rebbe is suggesting is his perfection. This
More than that. More than that. More than that. Yes. And that's what we have to learn from. But correct. But it's more than this. Because here's the very important point. Noach, the world pre-flood is an entirely different world vis-a-vis post-flood. It's not just a tweak. It is an entirely different world. If God just needed to kind of hit the reset button, what would it take for God to wipe out all of existence? All creatures, all living things. What would it take? What does God need to do?
Blink his eye?
The answer is it's a trick question. God doesn't need to do anything.
Right.
In fact, the opposite. God just needs to stop doing something.
Right.
He just needs to stop vivifying them. So there's no proactive action that God needs to do in order to wipe out all living things, which then forces you to ask, so why did he do it this way? Noah could have turned around and all of existence would have disappeared as if it was never there. And there was no need to rain 40 days and 40 nights and water and floods. Right? Why does God do it this way? The answer is because God's goal, listen to this very important thing, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to change your entire perspective on the whole flood story. God was not simply wiping out a corrupt generation. He was changing the DNA of existence. He was not just removing the bad actors from the world. He was taking the entire world and dunking it into a mikveh. That's what the flood was. He was purifying the world in a way that it never had been up until the point. Anybody want to guess how many measures of water a mikveh needs to have to be a kosher mikveh? What's the magic number?
40.
40.
Yeah, something with 40, yeah.
40. You think it's an accident? 40 days and 40 nights of rain. Mikveh takes the magic numbers 40. You think this is an accident? God was literally taking the world and dunking it into mikveh and saying the world is going to come out a different world on the other end of this. It is a more pure world. It is more transparent to its godliness. Till now, it was opaque to the godliness that resided within, and now it's going to be more transparent, or at least a little bit more translucent. What is the sign that God provides that the world will never again experience this kind of thing?
Rainbow.
Why? Because God's already engaged in arbitrary thing. He's making floods, and so let's do rainbows. Like everything that God does is exact. Why is a rainbow specifically the sign that indicates that never again will we have to revert back to this? Because what is the rainbow? I'm talking about science. In science, what is a rainbow? How is a rainbow formed?
It's
Refracted light.
reflected of every color.
Right? Light passes through clouds. The light gets through, right? But it gets through in a refracted way, and you see a rainbow. What do you think God's message there is? Till now, the world has been opaque. The light hasn't gotten through. After the flood, there is no opaqueness. Even if it's not entirely clear, there will always be light. Even if it is refracted, there will still be light. That's why the world is never beyond hope.
So why aren't we supposed to look at it?
Because at the end of the day, it is refracted light. It is not a clear, bright sunshine. It speaks to an obstacle. And we should not be turning around and saying, oh, an obstacle to light. That's beautiful. Light is beautiful. An obstacle to light is an unfortunate situation, although it is reassuring that it's only an obstacle and it is not a barrier. And that is the point of it. God is saying the world is different on the other end of the flood. And no matter how far you've gone, it will go, it will never be too far gone. And that's why we'll never have to hit the reset button, because I've made the world differently now. Now, here is a really kind of a theological discussion, but bear with me on this. So did God get it wrong the first time? Whoops, kind of screwed up that first time. Let me try again. No, it was purposeful. It was purposeful. Because let me tell you the difference of the world prior to the flood and after the flood. The world prior to the flood was truly 50-50. It was true 50-50. The needle was exactly here. It could go all the way this way. It could go all the way that way. And because the needle can go all the way in the wrong direction, given enough time, what's that old rule? That if something can happen, give enough time,
It will happen.
it will happen. And so it took 1,000+ years. It didn't happen overnight. But because because the needle was true 50, and therefore it had the potential of going all the way this way, but also had the potential of going all the way that way, given enough time, it eventually goes all the way that way. And the world goes to a point of no return. Then God recreates the
So
world.
God was giving humans like their
At that moment,
their choices.
free,
And said, "Well, I'm
utter
gonna see
free
what you
choice.
do."
Utter free
Right.
choice. God says, I will not influence your decision at all.
For 1,000 years.
Tabula rasa, right? And
But is
eventually,
that the way God operates? I thought
that's
that's
the
not
way,
the way
no,
God
no, no, that's the way
operates.
God operated. Then all this to in a sense support the argument of the way he has the world after the flood. And the way we have the world after the flood is that the needle is tilted just a smidge. God meddles. He's meddling in the fact that he has tilted the needle just a smidge toward the good. A slight tilt toward the good. Had he created the world from the beginning that way, then it would have been, hey, God, where's free will? It's not entirely free will. It's like you're meddling. You're mixing in. So God had a period that we can look back and says, yes, you want to know why I'm mixing in? See pre-flood section of existence. That's why I'm mixing it, because that can and will eventually lead to a point of no return. The justification, the flood, the pre-flood is the pre-flood engagement is justification for the post-flood engagement. God has the needle tilted just a truple, as they say in Yiddish, just a hair toward the positive, which means by nature, we are now slightly tilted towards the positive. So we will never be able to cross the point of no return as an entire world. There will be people, radicals, et cetera, like Sodom and Gomorrah and Hitler and all those, whatever that will. But as an entire world, we will never go back. We cannot go back to a point of no return, which therefore means there will never be a reason to wipe out. Because if it was the right thing to do at the time, right, then why is God saying never again? Never again is making a statement that it was not the right thing to happen, right? When God says never again, yet it was the right thing. So what changed? What changed that the world will never arrive at a circumstance that there will need to be a flood or an eradication, because the world is different, because the world is tilted just slightly to the positive. And you know the proof of that? You want to know what the proof of that is? That the world is not entirely 50-50, that the world is tilted a little bit towards the good. Hollywood is the proof that the world is innately good. You say, Rabbi, that sounds very backward. Hollywood is the proof that the world is innately bad. Right? What do you mean that you're going to use Hollywood as an example to the innate goodness of the world?
I know what you mean, because they make successful movies with the hero succeeds in the end, the good guy.
If you're investing billions and billions of dollars or millions of dollars into a film, right? Then you have to have a pretty darn good sense of what's going to resonate, or else people are not going to come pay money to see your product, and you lost. Invariably, except in the very few art house things that are meant to not make money, not meant to resonate, but meant to be an expression
Film noir.
of art, right? Some particular thing. But if I want a film to resonate, what do I need to do invariably? If there's a battle between good and evil, who's got to win in order for it to resonate, not just among the religious and the goody goodies, But if you want a film to be successful, people want it to resonate, who's got to win, good or evil?
The good guy.
Good. 10 times out of 10. 10 times out of 10, you want the film to resonate, good's got to win. Right? Because everybody views themselves as the good guy. Because that's built into their DNA. That's why they need to justify. If the world was entirely 50-50, if it was true 50-50, if it was not a tilt, then that a film where the good wins over evil would resonate with only 50% of the population. And the other 50% of the population, you would have to make a film where the bad guy wins. Right? But the truth is the entirety of the population, all people that are not mentally ill, right? That, what do we call somebody who is evil, is aware of it, and is fine with it? A sociopath. That's not a healthy human being. Every single healthy human being views themselves as good, right? And the proof of that is even go to a place where there's a collection of bad people, right? Prison. Do you think that when they're sitting down in prison, they show a film, right? Just, show a film, right? Typical film, right? Good guys win, bad guys lose. Does everybody in the prison go, shoot, we lost again?
No, because they think of themselves as good.
Right? No, they think of themselves as the good guys. They're on the side of the good guys. Yeah, if you're a good guy, what are you doing here in prison?
Say no?
What are you doing here in prison? Well, I had this. It was a circumstance. It was beyond my control. They have all the validations, all excuses why they can look at themselves in the mirror, say, I'm a good guy. Even if I did this and this and this, I have a reason. Innately, every person is tilted towards the good. That started post-flood. That started post-flood.
I'd like
Go
to
ahead.
throw in just an idea. This goes back to something you said earlier where I didn't want to interrupt you. Now I'm interrupting you. I don't think pre-flood, post-flood is reset number one. I think it's reset number two. I think reset number one is expulsion from Gan Eden.
Okay.
The difference, however, is that in Olam Haba, we think we can return to Gan Eden, whereas we don't want to return to pre-flood.
Right. Good point. Fair point. Yes, true. So yes, and I think that is an important point. We are trying to get back to Eden, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we are not definitely trying to get back to the era of that. The pre-flood era was wiped clean, right? Maybe that's even where the expression comes from.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, it wasn't just wiped out; it was wiped clean. Gonna have to file that distinction away for later. It's a good pithy way to define the. Wasn't just God was wiping out; God was wiping clean.
Mm-hmm.
But importantly, this now comes back to Noach and Avram. Why is what Noach doing in abandoning the world? Why can we call that perfection? Because he did it in his generation. There was no other option in his generation. There was no other option. And the proof of that was he was sitting there and building this massive warning sign for 120 years. 120 years. I don't care what kind of person you are. You can be the weirdest person on the planet. If you do something with enough conviction for enough time, you're eventually going to have a following, right? And if you don't believe that's true, go to the Kotel. There's a fellow named Gutman Lux. He is a Chabadnik wrapping tefillin, but he has a very colorful life story. At one point or another, he was called the guru of Central Park. Google it. It's true. This fellow, his name was Gil Locks back then. His secular name was Gil Locks. And he was back in the 60s, 70s, whatever it is, with the whole spiritual, and he was just disenchanted with kind of life, the way he was living. He was a typical kind of Long Island boy, whatever it is. And so one day he strips off his clothing, he puts on a shower curtain ties it around himself as a sari, and he goes and he goes into Central Park. He sits down cross-legged and just starts staring out into space. Day after day after day. Wouldn't you know it? couple of days, couple of weeks into it, people start sitting down across from him. He's not saying anything. He's not preaching anything. He doesn't know what he's doing, but he's just sitting there. And people start sitting. And before long, there are pictures of this. People in business suits, Wall Street types, three-piece suits, whatever it is, coming to bask in his aura. And then one day he's like, what the heck with this? What am I doing? He picks himself up and he walks wearing the shower curtain and nothing else under it. And he comes as a Jew. So he says, and he comes to Crown Heights. He walks into 770. Believe it or not, true story. Walks into 770 like that. And Yisrael Shem Tov, one of the Chabad's colorful figures, Rabbi Shem Tov in Washington's uncle. He's a piece of work. He stands about 5'3", and he's one of the most intimidating personalities, obviously, because he's just this live wire person. He's got a very colorful set of life stories and moments, and he talked somebody off for committing suicide on the bridge just because he happened to be stuck in traffic behind they had closed all the lanes, and he was the kind of guy who decided, yeah, I could probably help this guy out. And he literally talked this African American, this bearded Hasidic fellow talked an African American off a bridge. He is a colorful personality, Shol Shem Tov, and he is the first person who sees this Gil Locks as he walks in the shower curtain and nothing else. And he goes and he physically gives this Gil Locks a kick in his rear end. And they have become incredibly close friends ever since. And Gil Locks is now a bearded, black hat toting, long black coat wearing Chabad rabbi. And he has little YouTube videos of his interesting interactions with people that come to the kotel to put on film, whatever it is. Go Google it. But my point is, given enough time, they say, what do you call one person who stands in the middle of Times Square staring at the sun and mumbling to themselves? What do you call that person?
Crazy.
Crazy. What do you call it when you have 10 people standing in Times Square staring at the sun and mumbling to themselves? A religion. Right? So the bottom line is 120 years, Noach is sitting there building his ark. Anybody comes by and says, what are you doing? Noach says, well, God's going to destroy the world because of its corruption, and I'm going to sail away. How many people joined Noach?
None.
0, big fat goose egg.
But on the other hand, Noah didn't go around like trying
Fine,
to.
but there's got to be, neither did the guru of Central Park. He just sat down. And he didn't say anybody.
So that's
or
how
engage
you're
anybody.
excusing Noah for never going around trying to get.
What I am saying is that it is a clear indication that it wasn't Noah that just was really, really bad at evangelizing. It was a generation that was beyond hope. Many people stopped Noah and asked him what he was doing, and he told them. And not one of them said, you know what? Maybe he's serious. Maybe it's worth thinking about. Again, we don't know what that looks like. It's hard for us to fathom. But there it is, spelled out in black and white. 120 years he's at this, and not one person, of all the people who stopped him and asked him, joined him, even out of just simply, hey, benefit of the doubt. How about I just, better be safe than sorry kind of thing. Not one of them walked into the ark with him. And that's the point. In his generation, what he did was perfect. That's what it means. Had he been in the generation, it doesn't say had he been standing next to Avram. Had he tried that shtick of not going out and helping anybody in a generation that was post-flood, then it would have been entirely wrong. So basically what the Torah is telling us, and understand this exactly as such, paraphrasing for the first verse of the Torah. Torah says, come children, let me tell you the story of a righteous man, of a man who acted perfectly. But, disclaimer, perfectly for a generation that will never again be. So don't learn how to act from him, not because what he did was wrong. What he did was perfect. But it was perfect for a generation like we'll never have again. Rather, the one you should learn from is Avraham and the way he interacted with his generation, because his generation was different. His generation is like our generation, a generation that no matter how far you go, there is still hope. And so Noach did not only righteousness, but perfection, but in a generation that doesn't have a an actionable corollary in our day and age. That's important to know. The Torah is going out of its way not to disparage Noach and not even to say what he did was wrong. The Torah calls it perfect, but perfect in context. Perfect in context of generation. This is key.
I
and
still
important.
don't understand why anyone would name their child Noach after studying
My
with you. I
husband
think I
said the
said
same
this last
thing.
year.
Because
I said the same thing.
because Noach we definitely have to learn from him. Do you know how hard it is when every last person in your generation, every last one of them is corrupt?
Okay.
That's the way of life.
Still.
That's morality. Morality is survival of the fittest. Morality is living, right? You know, who is it? I think it's who wrote the book? Francis K. Dick. I think
Okay.
his name is Francis K. Dick. Wrote the alternative reality of what would happen had the Nazis, God forbid, won World War II. Right? Then I want you all have to understand this, because we'd like to think that morality is above zeitgeist, whatever it is. No, that's why we as Jews are very careful that morality is defined by God, not by people. We don't pick and choose what we consider moral based on whatever our feelings are. Because God forbid, had the Nazis won, forget the fact that we as the Jewish people wouldn't be here. But you know what would have been the morality of the day? Not just the way the people acted. It would have been the moral thing to do. Eugenics would have been the morality of the day. It would have been moral.
Right.
That would have been, because to the victors, right? What is who says it? Alexander the Great
The
said it.
victor go the spoils.
No, more than the victor goes this way. The greatest boon of the victor is the ability to write the history.
Right.
Yeah.
Had the Nazis, God forbid, chas v'shalom, have won, they would have been the ones who define zeitgeist. They would have been the ones who define what's right and wrong, what's moral and what's not. Eugenics would have been the morality of the day. Could you imagine how hard it was for Noach in a generation where their corruption was not just what they did, their corruption is who they were. That was morality. That was proper behavior. That was zeitgeist. That was everything. Noach had the fortitude to withstand all of that. Noach is a beautiful name. Noach was perfect. He wasn't just righteous, he was perfect. In his generation, he was perfection. Noach, when he faced the world on the other side of the flood, that's when he started not finding his place, right? When did that drunken moment happen?
After the flood. Yeah.
After the flood. He was like a soldier who was the perfect soldier of last war and can't find his legs, as it were, in this new war, right? In this new circumstance, this new situation. The Torah is telling us in a way that it tells us about nobody. Noach's accolades, Noach's bona fides. Noach was an incredibly admirable person in a generation that we cannot even fathom. But importantly, don't learn from him. Not don't learn from him. Don't learn entirely from him. Take the lessons that we learned from Noach with a grain of salt. From him you should learn fortitude, standards. You should learn from him perseverance. Don't learn from him interpersonal relationships or your responsibility to society. Not because he did it badly. He did his perfect, but he did it with a generation that we will never be able to appreciate or fathom.
We hope.
No, we know. That's the point.
Yeah.
That's the commitment from God. God has tilted the needle. That's important, Diane, because it's never, ever, ever is the point from this parsha. Is there now justification to turn your back on a generation saying it's lost?
I hope.
Because God makes that declaration. This is a post-flood world. And the difference between the pre-flood and the post-flood is that the pre-flood could have sunk to the point of no return, and eventually they did. And the post-flood world will never sink to a place of no return. And that's why our attitude always has to be like Avram. We have to fight for every last person. Every last person has the potential. Every last person has the potential of being saved.
But in the time of Abraham, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah knew of the flood, and they feared that there might be another one. They didn't know. They didn't know that it wasn't going to happen again.
You mean do you mean the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, or the people of
Yeah.
Babylon that built the tower of Babel?
Sodom and Gomorrah.
No, so I mean, well, we know they're bad actors, et cetera, but the ones who were concerned about a repeat of the flood was the the Dor HaFlug. That's in this week's parsha.
The door up, but I love it.
No, the Dor, not the Dor. No, this is actually I'd make this a Dor HaFlug, and they were called Haflaga, means the generation of the of disparity.
Okay.
This is the generation that built the Tower of Babel. That God's punishment to them was, and why did they build the Tower of Babel? Because they wanted to wage war against God, because of this sword of Damocles hovering over their heads, that God can apparently wipe out the world whenever he becomes disinterested. What they obviously were deliberately ignoring in this zealousness is the truth of what God said, that I will never do this again because the world is different. But they conveniently ignored that in their effort to make for themselves. And the Torah tells us that they weren't really driven by a honest concern that of being annihilated. It says, "V'naseh lanu shein." They were doing this with an ulterior motive, to make for themselves a name, for their glory, for their own glory. But they needed to give themselves an excuse. Their excuse was, who says God won't do this to us again? God did. That's who said it. But, don't let facts get in the way of a good story, right? We'd rather get all worked up, and so we can build this tower and then wage war with God and grow our own glory and our own. Who is behind this whole project? Nimrod, right? The one who later made it his business to try and cut Abraham, the evangelist of God, down, because Nimrod in general saw himself as a prime replacement for the King of Kings. But either way, the point is, straight from the get-go, the Torah is teaching us a very important thing, and this kind of sums it up. And continuing on the thread, intentional living, right, which was the point of last week's lesson. Intentional living is not allowed to be just about you and your own perfection. God is making a point by saying Noach was perfect in his generation, but don't learn from him in that aspect, that your intentional living, that your purpose is not only to take care of yourself. Your purpose is tied to those around you. If you do that, then you are not perfect. Next point in intentional living is that your responsibility is not only to your potential and the fulfillment of it, but to understand that the fulfillment of your potential includes the positive influence you can have on others. That is point number 2, cardinal rule number 2, as it were. Live intentionally, but don't live exclusively.
And what was point number 1?
Live intentionally. Live intentionally. God put you here for a purpose. You can't cruise through life. You don't have the right to. You don't have the right to put your life on cruise control. You need to be asking yourself, why did I wake up today? Lesson number 2 is that why you woke up today includes not only yourself, it includes those outside of you. All right, everybody?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Good Shabbos. Thank you.
Absolutely,
Shabbat
absolutely.
shalom.
Thank you.
Bye.
By the way,
Thank
everybody,
you.
JLI course, sign up. It is the course is on the biggest topic in existence.
Me?
Almost, Les. Even bigger, believe it or not. The answer is yes, you, but the infinite you,
Oh,
otherwise known as
very
God.
good. Okay, good.
Thank you.
All the best.